Today we're talking about one of the most misunderstood aspects of running, the taper. You've put in the months of hard work and now it's time to put out your best performance. So how do you go about doing so?
Too often runners over or under taper. Think about it. How often have you gone into a race and just not been able to perform on the day? It feels like your legs are flat and you just can't seem to get going. We're going to be talking through the key factors of tapering, where tapering goes wrong, and finally giving you a few tips to take into your next pre-race taper.
Tapering can be thought of as a runner's final preparation for race day. It's a period of training where you're soaking up the rewards of your hard work so that come race day you can put out your best performance. To illustrate how tapering works, let us look at a graph I've put together. As you can see, we have three elements that make up a taper: form, fitness and fatigue, which I've represented on this graph. For simplicity's sake, I haven't labeled the axes, but I'm sure you can follow along. During a taper, fatigue is our primary consideration, which we want to keep essentially as low as possible. Generally, we do this by decreasing an athlete's training volume, but maintaining some degree of intensity so that an athlete can still improve our second element, form. Form is the ability for an athlete to perform well on a given day and has quite a close relationship with peaking. The final element of the taper is your fitness, which should be slightly enhanced by the rest we've introduced during the taper. You're not going to gain much fitness in a typical 1 to 2 week taper period, so our primary goal here is to simply maintain our fitness with easy running and a bit of intensity that I mentioned earlier.
So where does tapering go wrong? It's important to understand that tapering does not mean resting. The most common problem that we see is when runners over-rest for their taper and then struggle to perform on race day. But why does this happen? Well, think about the last time you took a break from running for maybe a week or so. Your first run back probably felt a bit like awkward and uncoordinated. The thing is, running is actually a skill. When we stop practicing this skill, we lose a feel for the rhythm and the biomechanics that we're used to. This is one of the reasons why it's important to keep running during a taper and not rest entirely. Many runners also struggle with their legs feeling flat on race day, which is usually due to a lack of muscle stimulation during that period. Although we do want to reduce fatigue in our muscles, we still need to keep them activated and firing so that they're ready to go when it comes to race day. Lastly, our bodies crave consistency. When you're used to a certain training routine week in, week out, any major change from that is an added stress to our body. This is why tapering needs to be a bit more subtle and should still resemble your usual training to a degree.
When planning your taper, we have some general guidelines that you can follow. As a rule of thumb, longer races will usually have a longer taper. And the greater your training mileage is, the more volume you'll drop off during this taper. Conversely, shorter races usually require a shorter taper, but a higher maintenance of your training intensity.
The goal of the taper is to not only feel physically prepared, but also mentally prepared. To do so, focus on workouts that give you confidence for race day. For instance, it's often a good idea to do short bits of running at your race speed and practice that feeling of being smooth and relaxed at this pace. Another key aspect of feeling good is to get enough sleep. We would not suggest significantly changing your sleep habits, but at least prioritize sleep during this period. Getting enough sleep is by far the easiest yet most underused method of improving performance.
Don't be surprised if your workouts feel tougher than expected during a taper. This is fairly common as your mind wants running to feel as easy as possible during this period and therefore prepares for an easy level of effort. As soon as you put in a bit of effort, there's a differentiation between your expectation and reality as you were not mentally prepared to work hard. And this makes your run feel a lot harder than what it really was. This happens to all levels of runners, so don't allow yourself to read too much into how you felt during taper workouts. Lastly, tapering is very individualistic. Use these points to improve your taper, but if you found something that works for you, don't change it up too much.
Hopefully this has given you a few things to think about with regards to tapering. I think the most important point to take home is that tapering is simply a period of training where you're trying to give yourself that extra little boost before heading into a race. It's not something where you're trying to reinvent your training or do anything drastic. After all, you've had plenty of good performances in training without needing to taper.
Thanks very much for watching this video. If you found these tips helpful, be sure to subscribe to my channel and tune in next week for another running tip video. Until then, peace.
The stone cold stunner. She was a winner, started working at the diner. It serves as a reminder.